In the spring of 2003, Maren Sewell, a woman of 29 with flour on her wrists and her mother's stubbornness in her spine, was told that her bakery was going to become a problem. She was not warned. She was not invited to discuss it. She was handed a letter, slipped through the mail slot of her screen door before dawn, informing her that a national coffee chain called Brecken Hollow had signed a lease for the corner storefront 60 feet from her front door. The letter was not addressed to her. It was a courtesy copy forwarded by the county property office. A courtesy, as though that word could soften what it meant. Let me tell you about that letter. Maren read it twice at her kitchen table, still in her apron from the 4 a.m. bake. The language was clean and corporate, full of phrases like community enhancement and elevated consumer experience. There was a rendering attached, printed in color on glossy paper, showing a sleek glass-fronted store with pendant lighting and a chalkboard menu and a line of identical ceramic mugs arranged on a floating shelf. The rendering showed the corner of Dellard Street and Route 9 in Millhaven, Kansas. Her corner, the corner where the old Pruitt hardware store had stood empty for 2 years, where she had been quietly saving to make an offer of her own. She set the letter down. She looked out her kitchen window at the pale gray light coming up over the wheat fields east of town. She drank her coffee. Then she went back to work. The people of Millhaven had opinions, as small towns always do. The diner crowd on Dellard Street processed the news the way they processed all news, loudly and with great authority. They said Brecken Hollow was good for the town. They said it would bring foot traffic. They said Maren's little place, Sewell's, was charming. But let's be honest, it was small. It only had 8 tables. The line on Saturday mornings sometimes stretched out the door. She was leaving money on the table, they said. Brecken Hollow would show her how it was done. What they saw when they looked at Maren was a young woman playing house in her grandmother's building, making bread the slow way, the old way, the way that didn't scale. They saw sentiment dressed up as a business. They saw someone who would either adapt or be swept aside, and they had already made their prediction about which one it would be. Maren had inherited Sewell's bakery the way you inherit something that is less a gift than a covenant. Her grandmother, Ruth Sewell, had opened it in 1961. In the ground floor of a narrow limestone building on Dellard Street, Ruth had learned to bake from her own mother, who had learned from hers. The kind of transmission that happens not through recipe cards, but through proximity, through watching hands, through the smell of things. When Maren was 7, she stood on a stool beside her grandmother and learned to feel when dough was ready, not by the clock, but by how it pushed back against her palm. That knowledge was not written down anywhere. It lived in her hands. Ruth had passed 3 years before the letter arrived, leaving Maren the building, the equipment, and a laminated card taped inside the cabinet above the proofing drawer. On the card, in Ruth's cramped handwriting, "The bread knows when it's ready. Don't rush it, and don't explain it to people who've never waited for anything." Maren had laughed the first time she read it. She didn't laugh anymore. She understood it. So when Brecken Hollow opened in October of 2003, Maren watched. She did not protest. She did not write to the paper. She did not join the small coalition of downtown merchants who drafted a letter to the county commissioner about chain businesses and community character. She simply watched the way her grandmother had taught her to pay attention to the oven, reading not what you wanted to see, but what was actually there. The opening of Brecken Hollow was an event. They had a ribbon cutting. A regional manager named Mr. Ferris, young and enthusiastic in a pressed quarter zip, gave a short speech about craft and community. There were free samples. The line went around the block. People from 3 counties came to try the seasonal drinks and take pictures of the exposed brick interior. The local paper ran a front-page photograph of a woman holding a cup with a leaf pattern drawn in the foam. Maren baked her bread. She opened at 5:30 as she always had. Her regulars came as they always had. Old Mr. Kowalski for his rye. The Delaney family for their Saturday sourdough. The Hatch sisters who drove in from Concordia every other week for the honey wheat and stayed to drink coffee and read the paper at the table by the window. The bread was the same as it had always been. That was not stubbornness. It was precision. Here is something about Brecon Hollow that the rendering had not shown. The bread on their menu, the artisan loaves displayed behind glass in their pastry case, came frozen on a truck from a facility in Missouri. They were thawed overnight and baked in a convection oven on a timer. The croissants were pre-laminated, pre-portioned, pre-everything. The result was consistent in the way that a photograph of a place is consistent. It looked like the thing, it was not the thing. The first real signal came in November, 6 weeks after Brecon Hollow opened. A man came into Sewell's on a Tuesday morning. He was wearing a Brecon Hollow loyalty card lanyard, the kind they gave to their top customers, which told Maren everything she needed to know about where he had just been. He stood at her counter and looked at the loaves cooling on the rack behind her and said, in a genuinely puzzled voice, "Is that sourdough? Real sourdough?" Because the place down the street says, "Theirs is sourdough, and it doesn't smell like this." "It's the same starter my grandmother used in 1961, Maren said. "Same culture. Never dried out, never replaced." He bought 2 loaves. He came back on Friday. He came back the following Tuesday. On his 3rd visit, he brought his wife. By December, he was bringing co-workers. Let me stop here and ask you something. Have you ever watched something you built get called old-fashioned, quaint, beside the point, and then watch the world quietly turn back toward it without ever admitting that it had left? That is a particular kind of patience. It is not the same as waiting. It is something closer to knowing. Maren knew. She did not know the timeline. She did not know the mechanism. But she knew what the bread was, and she knew what the bread down the street was, and she knew that people who had ever eaten real bread would eventually feel the difference in their chests. Even if they couldn't name it, the winter of 2003 was the hardest stretch. Not because of Brecon Hollow specifically, but because of what it represented, the feeling that the world had decided that bigger and faster and more consistent was not just preferable, but inevitable. The parking lot at Brecon Hollow was always full. Their drive-through line sometimes backed onto Route 9. The paper ran a business profile, calling them a revitalization anchor. The County Economic Development Office cited them in a quarterly report. Maren's Saturday line was still there, still stretching out the door. But the weekday traffic was softer. People were trying the new place. That was reasonable. People try new things. But some of them didn't come back right away. Some of them were in the Brecon Hollow loyalty program now, collecting points toward a free drink. And habits are persistent things. There was a night in January, the kind of Kansas January, that doesn't argue with you, just states its case and waits. Maren had been in the bakery since 3:30 in the morning. The starter had been sluggish in the cold, and she'd had to nurse it. Adjusting the temperature in the proofing cabinet, waiting, adjusting again. She had missed the window on a batch of rye, the first time she had missed a batch in 4 years. She bagged it anyway and set it on the markdown shelf. She stood in the middle of her kitchen, flour on her forearms, the cold pressing against the old limestone walls, and she thought about numbers. She was not a careless person. She kept her books carefully. She knew that the margin on bread is not a margin that forgives inefficiency. She knew her fixed costs. She knew what a 10% drop in Tuesday traffic meant over the course of a year. She went to the small desk in the back room, where she kept her files. In the bottom drawer, behind the folder of equipment warranties, was a manila envelope. Inside it was a letter she had received 8 months ago, before Brecon Hollow, from a regional grocery chain that had offered to carry Sewell's bread in 12 of their locations. It had seemed wrong at the time. Scaling up meant changing the process. Changing the process meant changing the bread. She had said no. She had put the letter in the envelope and put the envelope in the drawer. She took it out now. She read it. The offer had probably expired. The contact might have moved on. She held the envelope for a long time. On the wall above the desk was a photograph in a plain frame. Her grandmother at the counter of this same bakery, 1960-something, flour on her apron, looking at the camera with the particular expression of someone who has just been interrupted in the middle of something important and is tolerating the interruption politely. On the back of the photograph, Ruth had written one line in pencil. "The bread doesn't know about the competition." Marin put the envelope back in the drawer. She went back to the kitchen, checked the starter temperature, logged it, and went home to sleep 3 hours before the next morning's bake. She did not doubt again. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story stops being about bread and starts being about something older. Brecon Hollow began offering what they called their Local Artisan Series in the spring of 2004. The idea was that each location would feature a rotating selection of local products to complement their core menu. Honey, jam, small batch granola. They contacted Marin in April through a form letter from their regional partnerships coordinator, a woman named Ms. Ogden, asking if Sewell's would be interested in supplying bread for the series. Marin read the letter at her kitchen table, the same table where she had read the courtesy copy 18 months earlier. The offer was what you would expect: a fixed wholesale price, their branding on the packaging, a small credit line in the store, their logo prominent, hers small, their terms, their schedule, their volume requirements. She wrote back a short letter. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm not able to meet your volume requirements while maintaining our current quality standards." She sealed it, stamped it, and walked it to the post office herself. What happened after that, she did not engineer. She did not plan it. It happened the way certain true things happen, slowly, and then all at once. In the summer of 2004, Brecon Hollow brought in a consultant to analyze why their Millhaven location was underperforming relative to comparable markets. The consultant did what consultants do. He walked the town. He talked to customers. He sat in Sewell's for an hour on a Saturday morning and watched. He ordered the sourdough toast and ate it at the window table. He talked to the Hatch sisters, who told him more than he had expected to hear. He filed a report. The relevant section, which Mr. Ferris would later describe to colleagues as both illuminating and deeply frustrating, noted that the Millhaven market demonstrated an unusually high consumer preference for what it called provenance-verified baked goods. This was consultant language for the fact that people in Millhaven knew where their bread came from and had decided that it mattered. The consultant recommended that Brecon Hollow explore a deeper partnership with Sewell's, specifically suggesting a co-branding arrangement in which Marin's bread was featured prominently, with her name and story attached, as the centerpiece of a premium in-store experience. Mr. Ferris drove down from the regional office in Wichita on a Thursday in September of 2004. He was different from the ribbon-cutting version of himself, a little less pressed, a little more careful. He sat across from Marin at the table by the window, the one where the Hatch sisters liked to read the paper. He brought a folder. He did not open it immediately. He ordered a coffee and a slice of the honey wheat. He ate the bread, and for a moment, just a moment, He was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they have just understood something that cannot be ununderstood. Then he opened the folder. It was a proposal, a serious one this time, not a form letter. He had done his homework. He knew her history, her grandmother's founding of the bakery, the starter culture, the Saturday line. He spoke of it with genuine respect, which was something even if his proposal still had Brecken Hollow's logo taking up most of the signage. "We want to bring people here," he said. "We want to feature Sewell's as a destination. We drive traffic your way through our app, our loyalty program. We'd add your story to our Millhaven locations menu, a QR code, a little write-up about Ruth. We think it's a compelling narrative." Maren listened. Her hands were around her coffee cup. She looked out the window for a moment at the street. A woman was pushing a stroller past the front of Brecken Hollow without going in. She turned left on Dellard. "She was coming here." "I appreciate that," Maren said. She was quiet for a moment. "But I have a different thought. You've been sending people to me for over a year. Your customers come here after they pick up their drinks. Some of them stay. Some of them buy bread and go home. And they don't come back to you that afternoon because they're at home eating it at their kitchen table." She let that settle. "I'd rather keep it that way." Mr. Ferris blinked. He had not expected that framing. "You're saying you'd rather not formalize it." "I'm saying the reason it works is because it isn't formal. People don't come here because an app sent them. They come here because someone they trust told them to. The moment it's a co-brand, it's not the same thing anymore." He sat back. He looked at his folder. He looked at the bread on his plate, which he had finished without noticing. He was trying to fit what she was saying into a framework he understood, and it was not quite fitting. "What would it take," he asked finally, "for some kind of arrangement that works for you?" She had thought about this. She had thought about it for a year, actually, without allowing herself to think of it as planning, more as understanding what she was and wasn't willing to do. "Carry my bread on your menu," she said. "One item, fresh every morning from this kitchen, delivered before you open. My name on it, my terms on it, my price. Your customers know they're getting Sewell's bread, not an artisan series, not a local partnership. Sewell's." He considered this. The numbers were not what his proposal had anticipated. Her price was real because her cost was real. But he was looking at the woman in front of him, and he was doing the math that his consultant had done. And the math said that what she had could not be replicated, only adjacent to. They signed a supply agreement in November of 2004. One item on the menu, one delivery per morning. Her name, her price, her bread. The results at the Millhaven Brecken Hollow were immediate and measurable. Their morning traffic increased by a third. Customers came in asking specifically for the Sewell's loaf before they ordered their drinks. The regional office tracked it. 2 other locations called Mr. Ferris to ask if they could access the same supply. He had to explain more than once that Sewell's made what it made, and that was the supply. There was no surplus. Surplus would require a different process, and a different process would produce a different product, and a different product was not the point. By 2006, Brecken Hollow's Millhaven location was their highest reviewed in the state, and the most common phrase in those reviews was not about the drinks or the atmosphere or the service. It was about the bread. People drove to Millhaven specifically for bread that was made in a building on Dellard Street by a woman who had learned her craft from her grandmother in this same kitchen. Brecken Hollow's marketing team put out a case study. They called it the Authenticity Anchor Effect. They presented it at an internal conference in Denver. The slides did not mention that when they first arrived in Millhaven, they had sent Maren a courtesy copy of their lease notification as though she were a footnote to her own street. The year the case study circulated, Mr. Ferris drove back down to Millhaven. He came alone, no folder this time. He sat at the window table again and ordered the bread and the coffee, and when Marin came over, he looked at her with the expression of a man who has been carrying something for a while and would like to set it down. "I want to say something," he said. He paused. "When we opened, we thought we understood this market. We had data, we had the comps, we knew what comparable towns responded to." He looked out at Dellard Street. "We thought what you were doing was sweet. I think that was the word we used internally. Sweet." Marin waited. "We were wrong," he said. "Not just about the market, about what we were actually competing with." He met her eyes. "You weren't competing with us at all, were you?" "No," Marin said. She said it without satisfaction because it was simply true. "I was just making bread." He nodded slowly. He extended his hand across the table. She shook it, not as a victory, as an acknowledgement of something plain and durable, the way you acknowledge the limestone in the wall or the wheat in the field, things that were here before the conversation started and would be here long after it ended. In the years that followed, Marin never expanded the bakery floor. The 8 tables stayed 8 tables. The waiting list for Saturday morning loaves grew to 6 weeks out. She could have franchised the name. Several people with investor money made the drive to Millhaven to suggest exactly that. She heard them out, offered them bread, and declined. Her grandmother's card was still taped inside the proofing cabinet, and she read it every morning the way some people read scripture. The bread knows when it's ready. Don't rush it. Today, the limestone building on Dellard Street is still there. Marin is in her early 50s now, and her hair has some gray in it that she does not bother to address. She is at the bakery by 4 a.m. because the bread does not know about schedules any more than it knows about competition. The starter culture, the same one her grandmother kept alive from the early 1960s, lives in a ceramic crock on the 3rd shelf from the top. Brecon Hollow is still there too, 60 feet down the street. They have remodeled twice. Their menu has changed 4 times. Their regional manager is on his 4th iteration. The single item from Sewell's has been on their menu for 20 years, and it is the only item that has never changed. And if you go to Millhaven on an early morning, before the town wakes up, you might find Marin at the back of the kitchen with a young woman beside her, her niece, who drove up from Wichita after finishing her degree, who said she wanted to learn. You might see Marin take her niece's hand and press it into the surface of a just-turned dough, teaching her to feel what she was feeling, to wait for what the bread was telling her. No curriculum, no manual, just hands and flour, and the particular silence of a kitchen before the rest of the world has started asking things of it. The chain came and saw a corner to be occupied. They saw foot traffic and comp data and an opportunity. They thought the story was about coffee and scale and market capture. They were looking at the wrong thing entirely. The story was always the bread. The bread and the woman who knew that real things do not need to announce themselves. They simply wait, and the world comes back to them, and the world is always a little sheepish when it does.